Thank you. You started with empirical analysis, but you have brought us to the roots of Western philosophy. You notice auton, know yourself. And what is the relation between authenticity and truth, subjective and objective truth? Very well. Who is willing to take the floor? Please, Marcelo.
Thank you so much, Maxwell. The great Ram Ramanathan, who did some of the fundamental physics and a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences on the matter of anti-climate change, has a very beautiful way of putting this. He says, when I began the research, this was my grandchildren's problem, and it was in a faraway place. He lives in La Jolla in California. Now it's my problem, and it is in my backyard. And this is within one human life cycle. But my question really is, what have we learned from the extraordinary social movement when prior to the pandemic, we saw millions and millions of children and young adults take to the streets? This was a transformational moment, asking for science, asking for climate change education. This was an extraordinarily powerful social movement. It was organic. It was entirely bottom up. What have we learned from that experience?
Thank you. It's an important question that I think several of us could probably address as well. Just to begin, it is pointing to how things are changing right before us. And what I'd hope to do in this work and the way in which I've accounted for other research that's been done is to make the point that one need not carry a PhD, an advanced degree, to have important perspectives to bring to bear in these critical challenges. It really, Monsignor, as you spoke about the clarity that young people brought to this room, to this place, they have not studied the sciences. They understand, though, they've been born into this world, and they know that things need to change significantly. And that doesn't map onto left-right politics, but things are absolutely different. And so I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the United States and the United States context. In this case, I'd say that the US is very anomalous in that if we look to global movements around young people, Lena's story, others bringing their stories to the fore, it is very inspiring. And that is, in my view, an important pathway among many to go forward here.
Thank you. Professor Eccellenza Monsignor Sanchez Rondo.
I want to say, you know that Luchenko is member of our academy for many years. So this statement is made by the academy. She copied this statement. This is the statement of the president. So
pleased to hear that.
And I want to say that was the academy really with Crutzen, Nobel Prize, Molina from Mexico, Nobel Prize, Crutzen for Holland, Ramanathan, to put the problem of climate change 25 years ago when I was appointed chancellor of the academy. So, you know, the right people criticize the Pope because say the Pope followed the ideas of the United Nations, a chaplain of the United Nations. But no, these ideas come from the Academy of the Pope. And the United Nations followed the ideas of the Pope in this. So I want to say, maybe not the people, not the journalists, not the people hear science, because really our academy have a great effort to communicate the things, but they don't want to hear. This is another question. So, of course, we need the disposition of the academician to communicate the truth, but we need also the disposition of the people to hear the things that say the academician, especially the politician. Because what was the question? The Pope say, just in the last comment that he said to Herrera, the journalist, the Spanish journalist, the other day, he said, I was negationist in the question of climate, but I won in the meeting of Aparecida in Brazil, and all the bishops speak about climate. So I want to understand what is the question of climate. He was the redactor, first redactor of the text in Aparecida, Bergoglio. So, and I began to study, and I understand that was a great problem. And after my academicians made me understand the problem. And for this reason, I put together the problem, the responsibility that are the people of faith, and the situation of the planet, and to describe the situation of the planet are the scientists. And I put together these things. And he said this. So it's not, if the Pope can be open to this, what is the reason that the other people can be open? The journalists could not be open to this. The politician. Look, the Pope did say another thing very important. And Obama said to me, I think that you are writing a document about climate. And the Pope said, yes. The same the French president. And please, publish this document before the meeting of Paris, because this could be very important, very influential. And the Pope do this. And not only, I know this for the newspaper, he called the president, the different presidents to say, look, this is very important question. So the problem is another. What was the idea? I think it's education and money, because what is the reason? They don't want to change the more important form of electricity that is today oil. The same for the Muslims. What is the reason that they don't want to understand? Because they live for this. This is the question for me.
Well,
Sorry.
I take your point. I really appreciate the history of this academy. I think the Pope has taken very strong stands, which are incredibly admirable. He's the most influential human on this planet, one could say. There was some polling around the time of Laudato Si that showed that he was also one of the most well-respected humans on this planet. I think the part that I suppose in response would be that those kinds of trusted messengers, like the Pope, repeating those messages often. I've been told that, or I've read that he's planning to go to the next Conference of Parties, UN climate negotiations. That's wonderful. Continuing these conversations, sustaining that urgency is critically important. And we have him to thank for advancing things over the last 6-7 years, for sure.
Sorry, I want to say something more. Cardinal Turkson followed the encyclical of the Pope. Cardinal Turkson, the chief of the more important department of human development, like a minister here in the church. He invited the CEO of the oil, producers of oil. And the CEO came to be blessed by the Pope, but not to change, because the Pope is very clear, and invented the idea of transition, time of transition. And as say the economists today, Jeffrey Sachs,
Yep.
There are today more inversion in oil than in the new energies. Today, this is the fact. No inversions in new energies, only in oil, because we are in transition time. You know, it's ridiculous. It's money. Sorry.
No, we're getting to the heart of the matter. This is great. Thank you.
Yeah, the transition is
Now, I hope that you have a pencil, because I am proposing that now we listen to 3 questions without giving answers, and then you make a final statement answering all 3 questions, because time is running short. Professor Lewandowski, please.
Yeah,
You are the first one.
Thank you. Well, mine is more of a comment than a question. I mean, I fully support what you were saying. I thought it's, very interesting. And I think it's particularly encouraging that there's some evidence from a few studies recently showing that if scientists are presented as being advocates for a position, for a policy position, that is within their domain of expertise, the public appreciates that and does not lose trust or does not think that the scientists are, these activists or whatever. So there have been repeated demonstrations of the fact that if scientists take positions within their domain of expertise, that is appreciated by the public. So I'm basically encouraging what you've
Yeah.
already said.
There's a couple of,
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
I
Yep.
beg your pardon.
You did tell me.
Write down what you want to say, and then you give a final answer to all three. Justin, up to you.
Thank you, Dr. Boykoff. So those photos you showed of the young people's climate protests, I cannot help but see this as unmistakably a moral transformation as well, right? And the infusion of moral energy, moral commitments, moral language into what was viewed as this scientific or technical problem. And what it's striking to me is that this parallels with what Lena was saying about the effectiveness of religious narratives in some ways. It's almost as if the moral protests that we see are the equivalent to what Lena was arguing for relative to the effectiveness of religious narratives, and that the protests are, these moral protests bring an ecumenical moral narrative to pluralistic and secular society in a way. So they're almost like these religious narratives for secular societies. That's more of I just want to get your thoughts on that essentially, but also a statement.
Martin, you are the last of the three. Please, go on.
Hi. Max, terrific talk. I wanted to pick up on something that the Monsignor said about caring. I had occasion one time to talk to three Maldivian fishermen about the issue of climate change and the fact that it's so well taught and so well known in the Maldives. And one of them said something heartbreaking to me. He said, outside the Maldives, no one cares. And what I wondered is whether you talked about creative climate communications, and I wonder whether there's a difference in the communication strategy between getting somebody to change their beliefs about climate change versus getting them to care about climate change. And are those fundamentally the same problem, or are they different problems?
Thank you. These are all wonderful comments and questions. Thank you very much. To Professor Lewandowski's comment, absolutely agree. The work that I was able to do in that book points to several fantastic studies. Among them, John Kocher is somebody whose work is worth taking a look at George Mason University, who looks at precisely that point, how he had found that one's legitimacy is not sacrificed by engaging in such advocacy. And then another researcher to look to is Shazina Tari, who's at Indiana University. She's done several important studies through psychology to look at what kinds of effects there have been through engagement, through advocacy as an academic. One of them that she found actually was this notion of the do-gooder blowback effect, that if one portrays oneself as too perfect without showing one's own imperfections, the contradictions within which we all live, there is less engagement and less resonance with audiences. And so Shazina Tari's work is really important too. To your second question, Professor Farrell, the idea of moral transformation, I think you're right. I absolutely welcome these expanded ways of engaging so that we all understand there's a collective action problem, as we all find and play to our strengths of our perspectives in this limited time that we have on this earth. And then third, to your question, Lee, it's a great one about caring and beliefs. One of the things that I failed to mention about the book, which I hope helps to answer this question, is that in the title of the book, as I just abbreviated everything, I didn't mention that climate is in parentheses, you may notice. And that's to say that, well, for one thing, the way in which I wrote it was hopefully able to then take transferable guidelines to other connected issues, such as vaccines, stem cell research, nuclear power, and so forth that we face in truth and post-truth society today. The second point, though, to your question is that, creative and ultimately effective communications about climate change sometimes may involve not evoking the term climate or climate change explicitly. And so it seems really basic, but the work that is consistently pointed to that is what motivated me to emphasize that so much in the book. So links to resilience, to stewardship of this earth, what kind of legacy we want to leave on this planet, to energy security, to national security. These things have come up over the last few days, to patriotism, to public health, that as Lena herself had pointed out, that religious pathways to engagement can be tremendously resonant here in terms of talking about protecting God's creation, for instance, and these don't need to come through explicit mentions of climate change. So belief is not necessary to care. Belief is not a pathway to believe that humans contribute to climate change, is not a requisite pathway to engage in such stewardship. And so that's ultimately my answer. And that's what the point I've tried to make through this work. So thank you all for your questions.
Thank you, Maxwell.